I'm Dani Fisher-Shin. I'm an animator and illustrator, and I have a great Skillshare class for you on animating a walk cycle in Procreate. Today I'm showing you an exclusive preview of my class. Let's get started. So now that we've cleaned up our base animation, we're ready to start adding secondary animation. Now this can sound kind of intimidating, but it's really just anything that isn't directly attached to the base animation that's kind of flowing off or affected by other physics. Secondary is honestly one of my favorite parts of animation because it can take something that has up till now been very technical, or very static and kind of just like a process, and turn it into something that has a lot more extra flair and a little bit more of a personality. Examples of secondary include anything that's not directly attached completely to the body. So this could be like hair or a jacket that's hanging off or a skirt or anything loose and flowy. That's gonna have different physics from our main body and it's gonna be affected by other elements. This is where you can kind of add a little bit more of that stylization and kind of like push stuff, and it adds a really nice extra touch to it. So as you can see here, I've kind of animated a little bit of an example where it's kind of like a string attached to a fixed point that's being affected by the up and down motion or by a wind kind of like invisibly blowing past it. So this is pretty straightforward in terms of what you would normally imagine, like say a flag or anything that's hanging off of anything else really. I like to think of it as a string. And I think that that tends to help when you have to piece different secondary pieces together, of just thinking of each side or each part of them as an individual string that's then attached at another point. And I'll go into that a little bit more if that seems kind of weird or complicated. So now basically what I'm gonna do is start adding in the hair with the same principle of a string being attached to a static point. Now, in this case, the hair is basically a triangular string attached to the static point of her head. And her head is gonna be moving a little bit, so I'm gonna have it move with that as well. But if you look at it all together, it's basically the same principle of a wave. And you can see here if we go through the onion skins. One thing that you can tell in this wave as well is that it's really just in-betweening, and it's not too much of a gap between any of them. It's a fairly even motion since this is one continuous walk cycle. We don't really need much ease on this except for maybe on these big arcs on either side, but pretty much it's fairly static in terms of motion change. And it doesn't have too much ease either way, just a little bit on maybe the top arcs of each arc that it's doing, but it's nothing crazy. And that's because we want it to look continuous with this motion that we have of the head just going up and down. And you can see that these two animations basically match. And what I've done is I've attached her hair to her head, and I've basically just moved this base of her hair and rotated it to where her head needs to be. And this wave animation is basically what you're going to keep in mind for the entire rest of the secondary animation. You just take this very simple piece and kind of use it to your will, like change the direction or change the angle, and pretty much use that type of movement for the rest of all of this. So once you have down this wave animation, you can even make a practice one if you'd like on your own, like this blue example, just to kind of get the hang of it before trying to attach it to your moving object. When you're animating a wave or a more continuous motion like this, it can be a little harder to finesse the loop point. So I'm gonna be, again, referencing my first frame at the very end over and over again. And that's something that can be kind of trial and error as you're going through and making these increments fairly even, following your general waveform movement. You can adjust, and if this is looking too close or too far, too big of a jump, you can go back and add a little bit more of a gap between these earlier frames or tighten them up a little bit, just so that once you get to that final frame jump between these two, it's looking a little more natural, just like it's a natural continuation from the frame before. If you just finesse and you keep referencing your first frame, you'll be able to get it. So now we're going to start animating our next secondary elements, and this same wave principle is going to be applied throughout all of these. So for this example, I'm kind of adding, as you see in the design, this front part of her jacket, and I'm going to animate that part separately from the rest of it just so that I can get that movement down and then add the rest in a way that makes sense. So as you can see, I'm following the same waveform, but this is going to be a slightly different variation because I don't want her jacket to feel as loose and flowy as her hair. I want it to have a little bit of weight to it. So it's not going to move as much with the wave, and it's going to move a little more slowly. So while animating this particular type of wave, I noticed that when her arm swings back, it was kind of at a point where naturally the jacket would have come inwards and hit it. So knowing that the jacket should naturally be affected by the arm pushing it back, I kind of wanted to show that a little bit, which makes my waveform less uniform, but it also adds a nice little bit of extra flair. So I'm going through, and as you can see, it kind of poofs out from where her upper arm would have hit it. And that kind of propels this bigger wave motion compared to the earlier ones, just to show that extra push and have that little bit of extra quickness and motion from the arm kind of translating into the wave. So now I'm going to take that same wave principle and apply it to this piece right here, attaching wherever this attaches behind the hip to this corner here that we already have. And I'm going to take that wave, and it's basically one of the straightest waves that we have just because it's so perfectly between those 2 points. So if you play it through, it's just the same exact thing that we've been doing, but just making sure that this side stays attached to that corner. Since this is the part after the arm has kind of hit it and is poofing out, you can kind of see that since this waveform got bigger, our lower one follows that with that big movement that kind of started at the shoulder there. And that's something that'll happen naturally as you kind of attach these ends, because this one had such a big movement, this one also has to. So you'll kind of see that even just watching this corner, you see how the wave needs to go for that bottom piece, because it's already going in a wave motion. And that's something that can be helpful as you're trying to attach 2 different points in something like this. So now we're just going to continue using the same principle across all of the secondary animation that we have. The next step for this design in particular is to add this sleeve here, which is the main sleeve that we'll be seeing in the animation. So going through and adding that, I'm again following the same wave motion, but I'm going to have it follow the up and down of the shoulder a little bit, and this part where the jacket is affected by the shoulder in this front piece that we were looking at, we're also going to have it affect the sleeve a little bit since that sleeve is hanging off of the shoulder. As we're going through and adding the wave, it's going to be messy and we're going to have to kind of go back and rework a little bit. So just keeping it really loose at the beginning and then tightening it up as we lock the motion down a little more is going to save you a lot of headache. So now we're adding the final touches. There's just one final secondary sleeve behind the main sleeve, and you can see that I've kind of offset the waves a little bit just because I know that it's not only attached to her back shoulder, but I also just want to show kind of an even more secondary animation. It's the same principle of offset that we were using for the hips and the head, etc. I'm just applying that to these 2 sleeves so they aren't kind of moving as one chunk, because that wouldn't be as fun. And you can see that here, I'm kind of hiding one of them behind the other because that's what would naturally happen as I move separately. And I've even added a little bit of dimension to the sleeve holes. I kind of want them to turn away from us slightly as they're moving in one direction and then kind of open up as they would come forward. So you can add little bits of extra kind of 3-dimensional attention to your pieces as they move, and that'll add a really nice extra touch to it. One thing that I'm doing as I'm going through and adding all of these different elements of the animation is I'm keeping everything on separate layers. That's partially because my brain is kind of just wired to do that from my professional animation background with working non-destructively, but it's also because as I'm going through and adding all of these different elements, they're going to be moving separately and I'm going to want to be able to edit them separately. And it's way easier to do that when they're on their own layers. It'll also help later with filling and cleaning up if I'm able to fill each of the layers individually rather than having to go through and cut them out and then recolor them again. That was one lesson from my Skillshare class. Check out the link below for more info and to join me in creating a full walk cycle in Procreate.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.